Hello and welcome to WWJPS. This is your host, Vanessa Pinto speaking. This is episode 2 of our mind control series. For those of you who don't know, that's Jim Morrison and the Doors singing the song Love Street. Now, what some of you may not know is that Love Street actually existed. It was the home that they lived in. So Jim Morrison and Pamela, his longtime partner, lived in a part of LA that kind of had the counterculture scene in its clutches, right? And that's Laurel Canyon, right? I was always under the impression that they were already doing music and that's how they all ended up neighbors. But no, actually, that's not true at all. They all ended up there randomly. They didn't know one another. They became friends once they were there, musicians, partners, all of that occurred. But how is it that in 1965, all of these people with this musical history end up in this one part of California and literally move the nation, if not the world?
Truth about Laurel Canyon's music scene. Nearly every major 60s rock star had military intelligence family connections. Frank Zappa's dad worked on classified weapons at Edgewood Arsenal. Jim Morrison's father was the Navy admiral who orchestrated the Gulf of Tonkin incident. The Byrds, David Crosby, came from a military dynasty. The canyon was walking distance from Lookout Mountain Lab, a secret military film studio. Zappa's log cabin became a gathering spot for musicians with the ripastasi. To parents, the CIA was actively monitoring the counterculture movement through Laurel Canyon. MKULTRA experiments happened at Ridgewood Ranch just minutes away. The entire peace and love movement may have been engineered social control. Most musicians there died young or mysterious deaths. Even Zappa later admitted the scene.
Yeah, it's interesting when you actually look at that time. One, how on earth is it just a coincidence that all those kids were there with that military background? Now, this is my own personal theory. It's not in the book. I was reading Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s by Tom O'Neill. And what the theory is that once MLK and the civil rights movement began gaining traction, a lot of traction, and people were actively protesting, that was a problem for them. And it was right around this time that music started. And it was right around that time that all of a sudden that Scott McKenzie song, if you're going to San Francisco, be sure to wear some flowers in your hair. It almost sounds like instructions, if you think about it. Because if you look at all the pictures through that time in history, there are flowers in their hair. There are girls without no bras. Everyone has a peace sign, free love, all those music. Everyone is barefoot. Everyone's on LSD and openly talking about it, right? And the world is kind of pretty much okay with the hippies, right? We're told countercultures are grassroots uprisings, that when young people grow angry enough, they spill into the streets. They alter their fashion, they rewrite the social contract, and they demand radical change. What if none of that was ever true? What if the most defining cultural moments in modern history, from the 1960s Laurel Canyon counterculture to the corporate hip-hop dynasties of the 1990s and 2000s, were not born in the streets, but engineered in executive boardrooms, testing laboratories, and intelligence-adjacent think tanks? I don't think all of the musicians were in on it. I think a couple were, and we'll get to that in a minute. But it's actually my theory that these kids were MKUltra'd by their family, either because they were doing this or they wanted to do something with them in general. But you have to think it's odd that all of them ended up there, all of them with that mindset, all of them wanting to make that music. You know, that our house is a very, very, very fine house. That's Laurel Canyon. That's Joni Mitchell. It's all of that music, all of that time came from these people that had these families and a CIA facility above them observing. That's just a good old coinky-dink, eh?
The man commanding the American naval vessels involved in the incident was Admiral George Stephen Morrison, His son Jim would move to Laurel Canyon and become the lead singer of The Doors within a year of that resolution passing. That specific coincidence, a father engineering the pretext for a war and a son becoming the defining voice of the generation drafted to fight it, is the sharpest edge of the pattern McGowan documented. But it is far from the only one. What McGowan found, as he working through biographies, public records, and military archives, was that the musicians who arrived in Laurel Canyon in 1965 came with a consistency that defies ordinary statistical explanation from military and intelligence families. Not one or two of them, not a handful, the majority. Jim Morrison's father was an admiral who commanded the fleet in the Gulf of Tonkin. Ray Manzarek, the keyboard player who was the musical foundation of The Doors, had served as an intelligence analyst for the Army Security Agency before he arrived in Los Angeles. Robbie Krieger, the band's guitarist, came from a family connected to the military-industrial sector through his father, Stuart Krieger's professional work. Morrison's longtime companion, Pamela Courson, was the daughter of Columbus Courson, a highly decorated Navy bombardier and Naval Reserve commander. Frank Zappa, who became one of the most prominent figures in the canyon scene, and whose home, the log cabin, functioned as its social center, grew up near military chemical warfare research facilities in Maryland and California, where...
I mean, you have to admit, it's a bit much, right? So with all of that being said, the counterculture did not destroy the establishment. It gave the establishment the exact tool it needed to neutralize the civil rights movement. By framing political dissent as drug-addled, chaotic, and culturally alienating to mainstream working-class America, the media successfully fractured the left. And how did they seal the deal? Well, they did that with the Manson family. We're almost there. But think about it, because yeah, all of a sudden it was the hippies, all of those people. So it was these kids and love and peace, even on All in the Family. You know, you always call them, you commie, pinko, bastard, hippie freak. You know, they were to be ignored and made fun of, but they weren't anything to really be afraid of, right? They were just passing out flowers and wanting to sleep with a bunch of people and doing a bunch of drugs. But would they have wanted to if it hadn't been in all of that music, if it hadn't been ineptly given? And ultimately, with that chemist lab above Laurel Canyon, when they first performed in Monterey, that huge festival in Monterey, where they say that opened the 60s, right? Like that's where it all took off. The CIA's person had made the LSD called Monterey Purple for that festival, and continued to make all the LSD in batches for Mama Cass for all of these musicians. So I think some knew and went along with it. I think others were MKUltra'd. I think Jim Morrison, I think the ones that didn't survive or found out at that point. But I think Jim Morrison now, it all makes sense to me, his behavior. It seemed like drugs, but now looking back on it, it looks like MKUltra. The way he would go from this to that, the way he would hallucinate and see certain things, the way, and without the drugs. Because remember, he was seeing that as a kid. So who's to say that there weren't some that they actually picked? Because Jim Morrison was a huge voice, but he was also very much used to say, this guy's a psycho. You know, hippies are psychos. You need to be wary of them. And then the final kiss on the mouth was Charles Manson, who actually had gotten out of jail recently when he started his involvement in the counterculture. He found a bunch of kids that were in their teens, early 20s, and were looking to be different. Were looking to be hippies. And he gave them all a bunch of LSD. And if you were to believe the narrative, he essentially became this sort of Svengali. He was able to completely reshape these people's minds and get these girls and boys to commit murder. Not just murder. They murdered a pregnant woman who was screaming for the life of her child. And her two friends that happened to be there, Sharon Tate, in that house murder. As they wrote all of this shit on the walls because he wanted to blame it on the black, which again, why did he want to do that? Where did that come from for Charles Manson? How did this man who'd spent all this time in jail, was pretty much like a loser, not only gets out of jail, but is able to pull this off and was committing crimes the entire time they were together to get money and whatnot? He was arrested several times for serious things. Walked right out. And I'm sorry, that man was poor and didn't have an attorney. He had friends. There is no way he was getting out of jail that many times without any sort of help. Not being who he was. He was literally someone disposable to America. But yet, what did we get? We got the Manson murders. And after that, the hippies were dead. Everybody was afraid of them. And all of a sudden it became, oh my God, you can, get these people to do anything. And so once again, Americans were afraid. Americans wanted family values, that American dream that we're supposed to believe. And if we start not to believe it or want more, they will do something in order to get us to think differently. So the helter-skelter murders posed and served a very precise psychological function. They took the peaceful, romanticized image of the hippie lifestyle and overnight rebranded it as demonic, violent, and insane. The public recoiled in terror, demanding law and order, running straight back into the arms of the state. The experiment worked. The counterculture had successfully neutralized political revolution by turning it into a lifestyle brand, complete with its own mandated uniform, dance steps, and vernacular, but also letting you know that anytime you slip away from the narrative, anytime you're different or think differently or question the government, there's something wrong with you. Because innately that thinking, look at now what they're doing with anyone that's the left, with anyone that's dissenting. You have to be a certain way. And if you're not, you get punished. That is straight up mind control. That means that they literally couldn't deal with it. So they were comfortable with using that amount of drugs on people. God only knows what that did to certain ones without anyone knowing. Those people were murdered, but they got to keep the status quo, right? So if Laurel Canyon was the prototype version 1.0, right? The industry perfected the model by the late 1960s and 70s under the stewardship of men like Clive Davis. I've stayed away from entertainment and pop culture, and mainly because in the Epstein files, I've been so obsessed with that and the government and politics and how that's affected my life and the life of everyone, and wanting to understand what the real history of the world is. I forgot about men like Clive Davis, because if you think about it, Clive Davis, Jeffrey Epstein, Harvey Weinstein. Epstein worked in politics beyond the trafficking of young girls and his weird Luciferian beliefs. He brought people together. And if they didn't want to comply with what he asked of them, he'd already put them in a compromising position. So they were going to do what he said, either way. Look at Clive Davis. P. Diddy was arrested, right? He was arrested for trafficking. And that horrible, horrible video came out.
New surveillance footage obtained exclusively by CNN appears to corroborate some of the allegations of abuse against music mogul Sean Diddy Combs. The video, captured on multiple cameras, shows Combs wearing only a towel, assaulting his then-girlfriend,
That's enough. That's enough. I'm using the video for a reason. That reporting was not from 2024, whenever it was he got arrested. I think it was 2024. It was from a few years before that, which meant that that recording existed. His behavior existed. He was committing crime after crime after crime. Well, he was good friends with Clive Davis. Clive Davis. Now, Clive Davis actually started out as an attorney, and then somehow he got into music. One of his first jobs with a record company, I forget which one it was, but it was the one he was fired from. And he was fired from it from abusing his business account. It was also because I believe he got caught paying the radio waves to make sure his, his musicians' stuff is, which is illegal, right? Guy never went to jail. Yeah, he was tax evasion. He had all sorts of things. Never spent any time in jail or arrested. So when he opened Arista Records and when P. Diddy got fired from his situation, P. Diddy went right on over to Clive Davis and asked him to back Bad Boy Records. They say that Clive Davis and Epstein had a couple things in common. They were Jews. They both supported Israel. And maybe they both kind of reported to Israel and some other three-letter agencies, because the other thing that Clive Davis allegedly, and again, this is all alleged in my opinion, and I'm not in any way suicidal, but it is alleged that P. Diddy had to drop to his knees like a mouse with cheese and essentially allow a lot to happen to him in order to attain that relationship. And they actually say that they were actually dating. They were in a romantic relationship. That's how, I think in a way, that's kind of how Diddy got back, right? He may have had to give up something, but what did he get? He got someone who mentored him and who taught him that blackmail works. All the videos that P. Diddy took, that's all blackmail. Epstein, all blackmail. Ehud Barak, the past prime minister of Israel, was actually, and it's in the files, he wired up the apartment building that they put those girls in. He was way into honeypot. So if you really want to look down that road, you could see that Clive Davis had the same amount of power that Jeffrey Epstein did, which means if Jeffrey Epstein was protected by agencies not going to jail, that means it's because he was selling an agenda for the government. While Epstein did certain things, for Davis, his job was to mind control us through the masses, make money that way. But with gangster rap, it's a bit more insidious.
That 1995 meeting in Beverly Hills in the home of Clive Davis, who was responsible for the of Whitney Houston, I said it. His days are numbered.
They claim he was one of the most evil producers in the game, right? Remember when TLC held him hostage in that bad contract?
There were rappers there from all over the country. They were invited to the home of Clive Davis, along with members of the CIA, FBI, which they didn't understand. One of these rappers.
This is a developing story that could fundamentally dismantle everything we thought we knew about the hip-hop industry and its alleged ties to the prison industrial complex. For years, the public narrative viewed the genre's shift toward crime and violence as an organic reflection of street culture. However, a stunning new leak suggests a far more calculated reality, that hip-hop down with the explicit, dark objective of filling prison cells. Reports indicate that this entire operation traces back to a highly classified, secret meeting in the early 1990s. Industry titan Clive Davis.
And you may say to yourself, Vanessa, you've just really gone full tinfoil hat and you believe every conspiracy theory that there is. One, again, conspiracy theories, that phrase was created by the CIA to stop people from asking questions about JFK. But seriously, if you think about it, how did this guy not go to jail? And also, how the counterculture with the hippies, they were selling peace and love and different morals and feminism and equality for everyone and love for everyone. Well, for hip hop, they were selling gangsta rap. Guys had the grills, the girls were treated like shit, everybody was murdering everybody, right? Why would they want that agenda pushed? Let's hear it from Ice Cube.
Off our bickering in our division, it's like follow the money. I don't know their names, Bill, but if you follow the money, you go high enough, you start to see, okay, this is an industry. Okay, let's take rap music. Same people who own the labels own the prisons. So,
Literally the same people?
The one thing that the Jeffrey Epstein files taught me beyond anything else is not only follow the money, but follow both sides of the money. Because in every transaction, in everything that seems to be happening worldwide, there's a yin and a yang. There's a positive effect and there's a negative effect. And there are the people that bet on both. They bet on both because either way, even if one loses, they're still going to make money on the other end. So why wouldn't you invest in Black music to sport. And think about it. Drive-by shootings. That was when Boys in the Hood came out. That's when all of that mentality and seeing that music as being that lifestyle, right? And to know now that much like the counterculture, it was manufactured for money. And in this specific case, while they weren't trying to control people, well, it was two birds, one stone. They could put all the Black people in jail. So what do they care about them? And they get that free labor because since they can't be slaves anymore, the only time they can be is in prisons. You don't have to pay them to do whatever. And on top of it, the prison, that money, that is fuck you money, prison money. It is fuck you money. So wouldn't it make sense that they put certain people in power? Like Jeffrey Epstein, like Clive Davis, like P. Diddy, because they're willing to do anything asked of them for money or for whoever it is that's asking for them, you know? Clive Davis didn't rise to power because he understood art. He rose to power because he understood compliance, market capture, and systemic control. When Davis took over Columbia Records and later founded Arista and J Records, he positioned himself as the ultimate gatekeeper. Why do certain artists who attempt to alter the paradigm, demand ownership of their masters, or break free from corporate indentured servitude end up isolated, chemically dependent, or dead under mysterious circumstances? A lot of the artists died during the counterculture. I mean, Hendrix and almost every single one was by OD. How many rappers died during that time? Beyond Biggie and Tupac, because there was a grip. Those were the two that everybody knew about. But drive-bys, all of that violence was happening. So those artists were dying due to that, right? If they didn't comply or just to sell the story. But it's interesting if you think about it, because it aligns with what they wanted. So consider the chilling parallel history of Bad Boy Records funded directly through Clive Davis's Arista umbrella, the modern historical record. Now, allegedly, they say that Clive Davis essentially had tapes on people. He was the one that taught P. Diddy to be like Epstein, to be like Harvey Weinstein. That's Hollywood. We haven't gotten to Hollywood yet. But it's interesting that Clive Davis supported Israel, same as Jeffrey Epstein. And Harvey Weinstein used the Mossad to chase people down who wanted to tell on him. So it's interesting, you know? So the whispers and legal filings point to a grim reality. The freak-off parties, the surveillance. Notice that those tapes haven't really been found or distributed, much like the Epstein files. That's why I say Jeffrey Epstein was one of many. He did what he did, and ultimately, the main reason he got caught is because he liked to fuck children and did unspeakable things to them, and he got caught too many times. But again, Epstein got that sweetheart deal. Clive Davis was never arrested. P. Diddy got a very, very good deal for those charges. You have to admit, as a Black man in this country, he's doing barely any time. No one's talking either. They say a lot of people are on those tapes. The silence surrounding Diddy in federal custody today is not an accident. It is the continuation of a decades-long code of omerta designed to protect the machinery of the music industry from exposing who really holds the leash. And it's not even them that holds the leash, because think about it. They answer to someone else. But an agenda is always being pushed. Everything that we are shown, everything that we are given, none of it's organic. I mean, I'm not trying to say that all musicians, but once you get up there, you've given your soul away. Look at Justin Bieber right now. Ever since that trial came out, he has literally, and now people are coming out and saying that Justin Bieber, P. Diddy did to him, because again, in those circles, while there's the mind control of the masses, they use pedophilia and crime to keep these stars, celebrities, politicians in order. That's their mind control. Our mind control is the story and the narrative and all the actors that do it for us, right? Yeah. And always remember, nothing's ever about what they say. It's always about money. Tupac and the Notorious B.I.G. served as big money makers. They were worth more dead than alive. Think of how much music they've made since then. People always talk about that. So how can we trust a song? How can we trust a musical festival or a historical narrative when the entire apparatus is funded by conglomerates whose primary board members sit on defense contractor boards and intelligence advisory councils? When you pull back the curtain, the illusion shatters. The festivals are behavioral compliance seminars. The fashion trends are corporate testing grounds. The tragic curses and sudden demises of iconoclastic artists are warning to anyone else who thinks they can truly own their masters. Speak truth to power or step outside of the matrix, right? Because if those artists go off, look at Kanye West. Look at Kanye West. Why do you think they're suddenly questioning the government? Because one of theirs got murdered. But this is about Kanye.
For me, and I hope that for you guys back at home, and obviously reading your comments, you have now understood why I was so cagey and I would not say anything about Ye. Because imagine your friend coming to you telling you that he was placed on a Psych 5150 hold from his gym trainer who colluded with a doctor to give him a diagnosis and then feed that diagnosis to TMZ so that the entire world thought that he was crazy while he was.
And also, she's forgetting one thing, and I'm sure she gets into it in the interview. He said anti-Semitic remarks. Or was he really speaking about the Zionists and what was happening? And it was interpreted that way because it's not the Jews that are doing, but the people that he was angry with are Zionist Jews. And so I think when he said that, they jumped on it immediately and made him crazy, and they made him anti-Semitic, and it worked like a charm.
In the hospital for a breakdown that he didn't believe that he was having. So just to jog your memory, let's take a listen to that clip from the conversation.
Do you believe that you have bipolar? Who told you were bipolar? And when were you told that, in 2015?
I was told that by a Jewish doctor, and the information was put out by a Jewish Hollywood trainer to the Jewish media.
Mm-hmm. So,
and that actually the day when they put me in the hospital, I started reading the Bible really heavy and rewriting Bible verses. And when the Jewish trainer saw, and you're like, that sounds pretty bipolar, but the Jewish trainer saw that, put me in the hospital, and then put it in the press. And
the press being TMZ broke it, right?
Yeah. I don't remember. I was in the hospital, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
why were you in the hospital?
Exhaustion.
Does that sound at all familiar? Look at what they're doing right now to Candace Owens, to Tucker Carlson. They're being called liars. They're being told that they're committing treason by the things that they're saying. For God's sake, Charlie Kirk was murdered. And what did all of these people have in common? Same with Prince, same with Michael Jackson, same with Tupac, same with Biggie. All of them had huge audiences. Huge audiences. And what they put out controlled the masses. So if those people who they are using to control people like us suddenly go, hey, by the way, we're kind of run by satanic pedophiles who eat children. They also steal from us. They're also this, they're also that. Everybody became crazy. Kanye, Michael Jackson, Isaac Cappy. Oh, I'm missing some more. But anyone who's spoken up became crazy and became against America in some way. And it's because they were exposing what was actually happening.
And me. That's a mafia. That is, you are with us or you are against us. And I faced that thing about Tucker Carlson right now, or we will destroy you.
And you.
That's a mafia.
And you.
Yeah. And me. That's a mafia. That is, you are with us or you are against us. And I faced that obviously in my own life and saw that, and I called it out for what it is. And it's, by the way, we're late to the party. Michael Jackson was trying to say what it was. Kanye West was trying to say what it was. They lived through this mafia. And finally, we have people understanding that.
What did Michael Jackson say?
Michael Jackson had a list of the 6 Jewish people who he said were messing with his life. Rabbi Shmuley was on the list. I can't think of the other people that were on it.
it seems we're off topic, but we're not. Ultimately, we are being mind controlled with everything. And the second someone goes off narrative, and the second someone dares to expose what they have us believing are conspiracy theories, they need to go. Michael Jackson is dead. Prince is dead. Both of them had extensive music collections that they were trying to get rights back of. Yeah. So now, one more thing, if you're saying, Vanessa, I don't really see, This is a man by the name of Nick Bryant. I do not like Sean Ryan, who's the host. I'm pretty much convinced he's a plant. He left the CIA, but he has an agenda, and you'll see it here, because I love how he basically tries not to conflate Epstein and Clive Davis and pretend that there's absolutely no run over. Nick Bryant got the black book, okay? And he has some interesting things to say about Clive Owens.
Let's just start at the very beginning with him.
So P. Diddy, he's an interesting story. His dad was a drug dealer who got shot. I've been told the contract was sanctioned by Frank Lucas, but I'm not sure. And then he and his mom moved north of New York City, and I believe he went to Howard for a couple of years, and he dropped out. And then he did various things for various record companies. And then in 1993, he and Clive Davis founded Bad Boy Records. Clive Davis, how do you describe Clive Davis? There's an infomercial about him now, which is a document. It's being called a documentary. And it makes him look like this benign octogenarian that's helped all these rock stars with their careers. But people in the music industry really don't like Clive Davis, most of them. And his criminality is kind of amazing. He got busted. He's been for filing false tax returns 3 times and then defrauding the IRS.
And remember, Al Capone got arrested for tax evasion. The man committed how many murders? And they arrested him for tax evasion.
3 times. He was involved in the biggest payola scandal. That's when record companies give money to radio stations to play their songs. Mm-hmm. He was part of the biggest payola scandal of all time as president of ABC Records. And then there was a Genovese crime guy named Pasquale Falcone, and he got busted smuggling 22 pounds of heroin into the United States. And the Justice Department started digging into him, and they came across all these shell companies that he headed, and Clive Davis was funneling money from ABC Records to these shell companies. So I've just told you about 2 decades worth of criminality by Clive Davis, and that guy has not spent one night in jail. That's what's amazing about him. So in 1993, I think he takes P. Diddy by the hand and they get on the yellow brick road. And P. Diddy has been engaged in all kind of criminal behavior, but nothing has come out. And I believe for Clive Davis, this is just my surmise, for a guy to commit as many felonies as he's committed and not spend a day in jail, I believe he's working for the government on some level as an informant.
I completely agree. And again, each person that's corrupt has their own special thing that they are doing. But what we're learning more and more is that mind control is a huge part of the American culture. And now I think for me, I like to dissect all of it, right? And when I started going down the road of Laurel Canyon, all of a sudden I was like, wait a minute, Clive Davis had jam stop. And then I went down that road. And they've said that he had a hand in the death of Whitney Houston. And it's interesting how many deaths occur on each side, how many crimes are committed, yet him, Epstein, not once in jail. And if you think about during the 60s, those people were openly doing drugs and doing all sorts of shit. I mean, Jim Morrison, I think posed nude and they arrested him. But they pretty much did whatever they wanted until all of a sudden they died. They just died. And the 27 Club got built. which is another version of mind control. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that the ultimate goal of manufactured music movements is not to entertain you. It is to occupy your imagination so completely that you never notice who is writing the script. When you realize that the counterculture of the 1960s were designed to fracture political revolution, and that the corporate empires of the 1990s were structured on blackmail, financial predation, and systemic control, you stop listening to popular culture the same way. The music stops being a sanctuary of freedom. It becomes what it was engineered to be from the very beginning, the background noise of mass mind control. The next time a new icon is crowned, a new movement is televised, and a new mandatory trend is shoved down your throat by the global media apparatus, ask yourself one simple question: who benefits from what I'm feeling right now? Because until we learn to turn off the soundtrack manufactured by the state and the boardroom, we will continue dancing to a rhythm designed to keep us asleep. All right. Episode 3 will be soon, and we will be talking about Hollywood then. And Mr. Weinstein.